Hey, everybody, welcome to the last section, section 3, 3 out of 3. And this section, we get into some things that are a little bit more speculative. We get into some sensitive areas. And maybe I'm overly aware of that since I've been doing therapy and work with people for so long. Always get concerned, excuse me, that people are not offended or they're not taken aback on things. As Troy gets back into it, he's very well researched. And so, I trust what he's saying, but I'll also go back and check and verify. And if some of you out there have some counter information to it, write me back. I'd love to hear it. Write Troy back. Maybe we can even get you on and go back and forth if you really understand this and look at this situation in a different way. I think that would be an incredible conversation to have. So anyway, sit back. You're going to get into, again, the most controversial part of the interview is coming up and very interesting, and hopefully you get a lot of different facts and information that will add to your life and how you live it, how you think about it. And if it's just entertainment, then I hope you're really entertained. All right, here's Troy picking up where we left off from the second segment. Thanks.
Solve the issue.
So that goes back to what you were saying about that it's only been done one time in history, and that was with Tiberius.
Yes. Now here's your denouement to the whole story. So you've got the idea.
I'm not familiar with denouement.
We've hit the climax. This is Christ setting off the dominoes that would, well before he begins his ministry.
Okay.
But seeing the fruits of those dominoes literally happen in the year of his execution. By the time he was executed, they were in a full-blown financial panic, and the Jerusalem temple was so scarred by this that by 70 A.D. the Romans had finally had a gutsful, and basically the whole place was destroyed. Remember, Christ made the prophecy, "I will tear this down and build it up in 3 days."
3 days, yes.
Yeah, okay. And he was talking about the true temple, as in the body of people who worship. But he also made the prophecy that, not one stone will be left standing in this place, which was fulfilled when Titus went berserk and destroyed the temple. And was it the fire broke out and all the gold ran through the bricks, so everybody pulled up the bricks to find the gold. So, that prophecy was fulfilled, but the demise of that temple, the very temple that Christ's first public act in his ministry was to go in and chuck out the money changers. All right. If Christ was that manager, blamed of embezzlements, but merely just working out the Jubilee that was expected in 26 AD, if he simply followed that, he had set in motion the very thing that would then basically bring ruin to the temple in Jerusalem.
Gotcha. So
the denouement to this, that's the climax, all right?
Yes.
The denouement to this is, why would Tiberius forfeit or get rid of all his money, okay? And as a little bit of background, what happened was that Tiberius, what happened was that he inherited a huge amount of money from Augustus, all right? Personal money. There's a lot of debate whether the amount means the personal amount or the full state treasury of the Roman Empire.
Sure.
Point is, it was something in the region of 100 million sesterces at the time, which would be, well, let's put it this way, Warren Buffett and Bill Gates would be pocket change.
Wow.
In terms of his actual personal wealth. Now, the reason why I say that he dumped the whole lot, he didn't just, he didn't say, look, you can have 5% of it and we'll see how we go. All right. He didn't then come out and say, I'm only going to make this alone. All right. Like most people would do. He just takes the whole lot and he says, let the Roman people use it. Let the Roman people use it. After all, I am their servant. All right. Now, if you go back into Deuteronomy, remember that Tiberius is very much in contact. He has as a lifelong friend this guy Thrasyllus, who has intimate knowledge of the writings of Moses. If you go back into Deuteronomy 17, chapter 17, verse 17, all right, which I'll just simply go there now, all right. Basically, what we're told there in the context of, if you go back a couple of verses, it says, if you would set a king over you, this is God talking through Moses to the Israelite people. If you would set a king over you, all right, whom the Lord thy God will choose, then from among you, if you set this king over you, you cannot set a stranger above you, which is not thy brother, all right, not an Israelite, and so on. Okay, and he gives a whole lot of things. He shall not multiply horses to himself. In other words, the idea of God's idea of a good king is he doesn't create an army to himself. He doesn't need an army to keep him in power. He should basically be a good judge of God's law, and that would be his protection. Okay.
Yes.
Okay. Nor cause the people to return to Egypt, which is basically meaning not to go back into the secular world. They're now, all right, the slavery to the secular world.
Yeah.
They are now God's priestly people, and that's how they should behave. Okay. Not multiply horses, which we said, and so on, and not do these things. He shall not multiply wives to himself. In those days they were polygamous to the extreme. Okay, so that his heart shall not turn away when he gives judgment. And here is the key: neither shall he greatly multiply to himself silver and gold. Okay, and it shall be when he sitteth on the throne of the kingdom that he shall write him a copy of the law in the book, out of which this is, before the priests of the Levites, and he will keep that law to himself, it goes on to say, and such. And in this way, he would be guaranteed to be a good judge and serve his people. The key point there is that you don't multiply silver and gold. Here you've got Tiberius in the middle of a financial crisis, which I believe he could no doubt trace back to what was going on with the Gaulish rebellion, in terms of their not wanting interest payments. He had already seen how it was working in the Near East. I have no doubt he heard reports about Christ chucking out the money changers. Probably, and this is high speculation, made the connection between Arimathea and Christ, and in consultation said, what are these guys about? It's all about the interest. It's all about how interest is serving and all that sort of stuff. Yet I am effectively a king of Rome, being the emperor and so on. What should I do? If I go back into their laws, one of the things it says is you don't multiply silver and gold. And this is what Tiberius does. He releases all his personal wealth, and he literally starts to live as a recluse, but as a servant of the people. That becomes his mantra. I am not the ruler of my people, I am the servant. And, he becomes the bane to the Senate and all these people who would rule, as a result of power. Guys in charge we'll say what gets done. And he holds everybody in check, and he rescues the whole situation of this financial crisis started by these dominoes with the fall of the House of Malchus, the Purple House in Tyre. He rescues the whole situation by giving up his personal fortune. Only one time in history.
So he saved Malchus and Tyre too, that company?
No, he didn't. They went bankrupt. The whole deal went bankrupt.
Okay.
What he saved Rome.
From that chain reaction.
That chain reaction. He then, later on, sort of in the sequel to all this, of course, becomes extremely embroiled in problems with a guy called Sejanus, who plays a role in all this that was too detailed to go into. Sejanus was running around in Egypt and was connected to the biggest importer of goods in Rome and so on like that, and probably represented the vested interests who wanted the status quo to remain. What's with all this cutting out interest and all this sort of stuff, all right? For me, the essence here is that you have a plausible storyline that shows how that which affected Rome in 33 AD was actually kicked off by what amounts to somebody calling him a rogue trader, who, in my opinion, obviously forgave his debts, and in so doing influenced the Roman leader at that time, who had intimate knowledge of the exact same laws that Jesus Christ would have been following if he were that rogue trader. And I'll just put one other thing. There is a particular story. I think it's in Luke. I'd have to go in to get the actual details where it is. Can't get it quite to hand. But there's a famous story where Christ talks about a conversation with a foreign prince. All right, and the prince means ruler, so he's basically the ruler of that thing,
Okay.
whatever that place is. Now, in the context of Christ, it's either Judea or Syria, but it wasn't Syria because Syria was under governorship. It's either Judea or it's Rome. All right, so he's either talking to the ruler of Judea or he's talking to the ruler of Rome in this what do you call them anecdote that he gives. And the key discussion point on this is if you would follow me, i.e., me as the embodiment of the Word of God, you're a very rich man, sell everything you have and follow me. Do you remember that particular
Oh yeah, yeah.
part of it?
The eye
it'd
of
be
the
nice
needle.
to actually read.
That was the
Yes, it's in
rich
the
man that goes.
context of all that. Yeah.
Yes.
And so on. The trouble is that in the Greek, and there are two versions of it in two different gospels. One just says a rich man, but the other one actually says a prince. All right, and the prince really means a ruler.
Okay.
Okay, all right. It's my contention, all right, that this ruler, not just a rich man, not just a merchant. It's my contention that this ruler was Tiberius uh,
Ah.
at that particular time. Because the story is told in anecdote, as in it didn't happen during the ministry. It's told about something that happened beforehand. So, going back to your question, who came into contact in the Sacravir um, revolt in Gaul? You know, one can speculate. It's dangerous to do so, but in my opinion, it so um, completely covers the idea that Tiberius could have read those words, "You shall not multiply silver and gold if you are a ruler," combined with what Christ tells a ruler, all right, to do. Because at the end of the day, let's face it, anybody who follows Christ, Paul talks about the crown of glory that you inherit. We are all destined to be kings. So the rule for kings is you don't go trying to accumulate gold and silver to yourself in that way if you plan to rule with Christ
Yes. Don't store up riches on earth. Store
on
them up
earth. That's
in heaven.
exactly the thing is there. In my opinion, did Tiberius, particularly because the financial crisis in Rome actually came to a head just after the execution of Christ, did Tiberius actually simply make the decision, based on these sorts of things? Well, if he was man enough to die for what he had to say, should I maybe follow suit with what a good king should do according to these laws?
Wow.
All right, so it's speculation, Mark, and so on. And
But
if I,
it's a
you know,
positive side to the story too, because you think the rich man didn't do it, but then if that's what was the motivation with Tiberius,
yeah,
now you've got something to say. Yet that there are human beings that will give a wealth beyond anything other than probably what Solomon had,
yeah,
and was willing to give that up to follow Christ.
yeah. It so seldom happens. I might be wrong. I've heard stories about people, kings who gave up their wealth, and I mean, there's plenty of stories of kings who give up their power as
Yes.
such. But the point is that a king has power based on the trust we all have in him to rule justly.
Yes.
All right. Okay. I think this is what Tiberius seems to have been reaching for, especially in his latter years. But what I put it down to is a progression over his years, going back to Rhodes, where he comes into contact, where he's thrust into the maelstrom of what's going on with Roman silver. It's an economic war that he's having to get his head around, and it culminates in one of the greatest financial panics in human history.
Which then started by the time what in the 300 and was it 56 or
Well,
something like that. The Rome ended up
yeah, it took
completely
another
falling.
few hundred years. Remember, in our previous discussion, as I said, there are times allotted to the the various kingdoms that rule on this earth, systems. They're given time to bring forth fruits in the biblical scheme of things. Babylon had some time, Persia had time, Alexander the Great's gang had time, and the Romans had a whole lot of time. When they morphed into the Catholic Church, they had 1,260 years of time.
Yes.
Napoleon had time. Now we've got this banking establishment. They've been given time.
Short time, but it's time.
It's time that's all in accordance. When you do a good study of biblical law, you can see that it's just time. There's justice in it. They cannot turn around and say, "Hey, man, you judged us before just as we were getting it right."
Gotcha.
You see what I'm saying? So
Yeah.
it all has that process. I've known plenty of people in my time who have come to an understanding of what the Anglo-American banking establishment is. Hey, it's Babylon. Hey, we got to do something about this. And I would have been one of them many years ago. Who felt, yeah, we've got to find a way to put a spanner in the works and overthrow it and all that. No, I'm perfectly happy leaving that to God's justice. And what I'm saying with this whole discussion here, with putting forward a scenario of how Christ dealt with the banking interests of what amounted to the temple in Jerusalem, because that was his focus, was the destruction of that temple. He really had to get rid of the nastiness that was taking place in there. And it's one of the reasons why his ascension did not take place at the temple. It took place on the Mount of Olives, which was exactly 200 meters away from the temple, which in old biblical law, if you're going into exile, you have to move 200 meters away from the tabernacle to begin your exile. You can't come within 200 meters of it. And quite simply, the old prophecies, just as Shiloh was abandoned by God back in the Old Testament in favor of Jerusalem at a later date, so Jerusalem was going to be abandoned. And that took place, I believe, when Christ descended from the Mount of Olives. That was God saying, my postbox is no longer this temple.
Wow.
All right. That's why it was destroyed in 70 AD down through the line. But Joseph Farrell makes very good evidence in Babylon's Banksters, puts forward great evidence that shows the temple in its various forms in all cultures inevitably becomes the source of this debt-based financial system. Well, in Christ's day, it was a full-blown money laundering, destructive, system for the benefit of these guys that called themselves the high priests. They were milking this to the extreme.
Yeah.
And I think the Romans cottoned on, probably through the efforts of the likes of Arimathea and Christ, but they certainly cottoned on, and had to deal with it. And eventually, in their way, they did. It all finished up in 70 A.D. and it was gone. They destroyed it, but history chugs along, and the system reinvents itself over time, and in come the bankers. And today we're, as far as I'm concerned, the Federal Reserve is no different to how the Temple of Jerusalem was operating back in those days.
So if we do a parallel, which I remember last call we talked about, you thought that there might be some kind of a parallel going on for Christ's reappearance into the midst of this. That first of all, I would say that why wouldn't God put His Son in the most luxurious business on earth? The purple of Tyre. So what would be the most luxurious business on earth that maybe he has an investment in now, that there's something similar parallel in that? And that's speculation or fiction. I don't know, but what do you do with that?
Well, okay, before I answer that, I think,
Sure.
this is dead right, because, we have to look to this, that if my speculations, and I have to stress this to all those people, especially Christians out there, all right, that these are speculations based on what I know of biblical law and what I know would have affected Christ in his life, all right, as in how he would have conducted himself, okay, had he gone into these, these pursuits in his life. Most people would say, well, from the age of 12, he just simply honed his skills as a preacher. Okay, but I don't believe so. I think that Christ had to go through the temptation of being a man of the world in order to understand what it's like for the rest of us.
Yes.
All right. Okay. So if he's some mollycoddled, um, you know, guy who's just been groomed to be a preacher and he's been kept safe all those years until this moment arrives, it doesn't quite gel with the whole thing. If we go to Christ's temptation, remember the temptation. You can have all of this if you bow down to me. The
Yeah,
temptation.
40
Of the
days. It's
yeah.
here is a question I was going to ask you off the record because personally, I wondered what happened during those 40 days in that temptation, but now you're onto it. Perfect
Yeah,
time.
well, you see, 40 days is the number for testing. All right, time of testing, 40 years in the wilderness for the Israelites, 40, days and nights in the ark for Noah, all this sort of thing. Okay, and so 40 days in the wilderness really is the anecdotal story that Christ has given to us. I believe of what he went through as an extremely rich man engaged in commerce. All right. Now I'm saying he was engaged in commerce, that one of his interests was to have Malchus and Co. in Tyre. That's my speculation. But I have no doubt that Christ, when he spoke to the rich man how difficult it was, he himself had been tempted by this. He himself had been set up in such a way, or had set himself up, worked in such a way, where he could quite easily have followed the path of riches and luxury, based on his own abilities. But when that Jubilee came around in 26 AD, all right, he had to do it. He's otherwise he wasn't going to qualify as the Messiah. And the temptation in the wilderness, I think, relates to very much the time throughout his life as an adult of battling with these temptations. I don't. The Messiah could not have been above temptation. In fact, he had to have suffered temptation in order to overcome it. Do you see what I'm saying?
Oh, absolutely.
You know,
Absolutely. To understand it, to have an experience of it, to
yeah,
have empathy for what he is giving his life for.
yeah, and to be able to present himself before the court of God as the risen Christ, saying, "I have overcome."
Yes.
All right, it had to be a part of his experience during those times, and this is why I put down the Christ that I believe existed from the age of 12, and probably earlier, but from the age of 12 to the beginning of his ministry, um, had a very privileged life, uh, but also probably based on working very, very hard in the commercial field. All right. Uh, that had to have been the case, and I think that's what the temptation in the wilderness relates to us.
Amazing. So the towards when did the temptation occur?
The temptation is related to us during the ministry. Okay, all right,
Okay, so it wasn't at the end of the ministry, it was during the ministry.
sure. And I'm going to throw something out here. I would say it could possibly have happened also in connection to the when he went walking back to Tyre. During these times they went walking. Okay, Tyre is a long way from Jerusalem for a walk. Okay. What I would say is that during the ministry, he was still probably, why am I doing this? I could be a rich guy making a lot of money. I did pretty well before, but I have to be about my father's business. So I can't do it. This is the temptation. This is the essence of what is going on. You
Yeah,
know,
build up your wealth here. He's got it. He's
absolutely.
built up his wealth. It's not building it. He's
Yeah.
got it, and now it's letting it go
Yeah.
for a
See, I
bigger
used to
kingdom.
I used to think that Christ had given away all his wealth as part of becoming the Messiah and so on. But that's not really a requirement. The Jubilee doesn't say give up all your wealth, become poor. All right. What I believe happened was that Jesus Christ gave up all debts owed to him.
Right.
Okay, as part of that, then paid with his life for all eternity all the debts owed to God by the whole of humanity. All right, which is basically the wages of sin are death.
He's a jubilee in himself, then, for mankind.
Exactly, he is definitely. That's creation jubilee, and of course, creation's the final, well, not the final, but the culminating jubilee is basically the resurrection, where all are freed from death. This is the theology of what a kinsman redeemer really is all about in this case. But in terms of the actual physical existence that Christ had on the earth at that time, he had to go through these processes. Now, I've just remembered what I was going to. How do we relate that to what's going on today? In the book of Revelation, Christ, I think it's in the 17th chapter, which is the last chapter, it says Christ is the essence of prophecy. All right. And what that means is that the life that Christ led is actually prophecy in itself. All right. So this is what I mean by when I said one of the first public act of Christ's first advent was to go in and chuck out all the bankers. You can expect that the first act of Christ's return, as it's called, is to chuck out all the bankers.
Yes.
All right. And so we go through that process. We can look at the Gospels and we can see a prophetic pattern for how his second advent will unfold. All right. Culminating not only in his, in his first advent, it culminated in his resurrection and ascension. Okay. The second advent culminates in the resurrection and ascension of those who overcome. You see where I'm going with that?
I'm following you, but there's still a little something missing there.
Okay. In Christ's time, his own life is representative of a prophetic in itself. It's representative of a prophetic sequence of events.
Sure.
Right? He dies and he is resurrected himself.
Yes.
He's the first of many brethren. So we can expect in his second advent, all right, that those who have died in Christ will be resurrected in the second advent. All right.
Okay.
Okay. So he represents what happened back then for himself, but for the greater majority of the people who would be called the kingdom and those who are affected by the kingdom, there will be the resurrection of those who have overcome with Christ. All right. I'm one of these people who believe in two resurrections: the resurrection of the overcomers, the kind of people that Paul talked about, i.e., people who really commit themselves to being Christians. And
Yes.
I also do believe in the resurrection of all humanity at a later date, creation's Jubilee into the future, in which they themselves are also brought into oneness with God. But there is a period of time where Christ and the overcomers rule through that period. All right.
The thousand year period.
Some people call it a 1,000-year period or whatever. I just say it's the period. It's synonymous with the rule of David when David took over from Saul. In other words, Christ's return is synonymous in biblical prophetic models. Saul represents the period of time from Christ to today, or to his second coming, in which the church rules. All right, and then when Christ's return, it represents when the anointed David actually comes into rule. And then you also have a period that is synonymous with or parallel to Solomon's reign.
So,
the great. Mm-hmm.
So where we're at with this then is that, but there's a different time frame, a fast time frame or a faster time frame of what's going to be happening when he throws the bankers out this time, right?
Yes and no. So if we're taking Christ's life before and we're saying, our first recorded instance of what Christ does after arriving back in Judea at the age of 12, he turns up at a wedding, he turns the water into wine. That's a private affair. His first public event is out dealing with the bankers, which is what we're interested in. All right.
Yes.
In my speculations, I'm saying that the process that dealt with driving the bankers out and ultimately led to, in 70 AD, the destruction of that temple, the source of all the problems, actually was initiated in the Jubilee of 26 AD. All right.
Yes.
And he begins his ministry about his father's work, but the process was initiated not by going about preaching and so on, but just simply following God's laws. This is the point that I want people to understand in terms of how we live in the world today, is that Christ just simply obeyed the commandment to forgive all debts to himself, and that triggered off through no fault of his own, Of course not. It's just that the system was ripe for that, and it was going to go. But the point is, you've got 26 A.D. right the way through to 30 A.D., the beginning of his ministry, through to 33 A.D., his execution and resurrection. All right. What I'm saying is that if the model of his life represents how he returns in the future, all right, and that return is a process and not an event, then the process has been put in motion, I believe, and this is what I hope Christians hold out as a source of hope. The process has begun with an event, the events that took place in 2008, 2009.
Oh, okay. I got
All right. You know, now it's not exactly a correlation because the 120th Jubilee took place in 1993. Okay. And we could say that, a lot happened in 1993 that built up, to the problems that we have today, the financial crisis. However, I am saying that whatever is happening behind the scenes, the risen, living Christ is at work in exactly the same way as he was in 26 AD, if I'm correct, and just simply adhering to God's commands. And that the results of his actions in doing so will result in Babylon falling.
Well, I'd be curious to know what happened in 1993, right?
Yeah, I've looked at it and so on. The only thing that I can say about that is that when you look at 1993 as possibly a crossover between the Pentecostal church into the Davidic church, which is correlative with if you've got the Passover period, which is Moses to Christ, and then from Christ to today, we've had what's called the Pentecostal period, when the people in the upper room accepted, the speaking in tongues at Pentecost. Sure. All right, we entered into the Pentecostal era of the called out ecclesia, congregation of what would be God. All right, and that's been the church. Now that Pentecostal era correlates with when Saul, King Saul, was placed as king. He ruled for 40 years. Okay. Funny thing is that Saul ruled 40 years, David ruled 40 years, and Solomon ruled 40 years. Now, what's the likelihood of that? All right. Okay. There is definite symbolic significance in the numbers that are involved. Okay. So the 40 years of Saul's rule match the period of time that the Pentecostal church, in terms of what happens, how people think, what they do. And Saul was in it for himself. He wanted to make a dynasty and all that, and you can see that reflected in how the popes behave and even how Protestant churches behave. Okay? When we come to 1993, the thing about changing from King Saul to King David is that there is a 7-year overlap between the two of them. All right? Saul dies. King David rules in Judah, the tribe of Judah, but King Saul's sons continue to rule in the rest of Israel. It's not till 7 years later that Saul's legacy is finally put to rest and King David rules all of Israel. All right. So if we take that as a model, from 1993 being a Jubilee period, 120 Jubilees after Adam, a period where we could say the end of the Pentecostal era, the Saul era of the church, took place, then we have this quasi 7-year overlap before we enter into the period of time where we are ruled by a church that rules like David. Do you get what I'm talking about?
Yes.
And remember that Christ is the son of David, not the son of Saul.
Yes.
Okay. So there's gray area there. And for Christians who are looking for prophetical fulfillment, do not fall into the trap that things happen as events. They happen as processes. All right. And for those who have wisdom, the process is determined by how God's laws work, irrespective of whether nations follow them or not. All right. Okay. And it's those processes that that we have to look for. And for me, the period of time that we're in is entirely to do with the process, not only of the changeover from the Pentecostal church into the company of David, or the church that will rule like David ruled rather than like Saul ruled. All right. It's the changeover also from a system that is controlled by Babylon, i.e. captivity by Babylon, into a system that can then start to institute these very natural laws of debt forgiveness, jubilee, lack of interest, and 1 day and 7 rest.
Wow, there's a lot
to absorb in that. Yeah, that's
yeah.
We've gone a lot further than I actually thought. But to answer that question, how do you look at Christ's life, particularly in some of the, in light of the speculations to do with the Malchus and Co. company going bust? All right, could we put our finger on a particular company that is that version today? I I would venture the Lehman moment.
Yes.
Would be one of them. One of them is possibly even the AIG moment that a lot of people sort of lost out on really looking at in comparison to Lehman. That would possibly be that particular event, but it is speculation, Mark. But I think it's worthwhile. It gives hope. The thing is, you've got to remember that if I'm placing events in 26 AD, they did not come to knowledge in the greater, what you would call the mainstream media of the Roman Empire, until 31 to 32 AD. All right, so that gives you a good, 6 years of papering over.
Oh yeah.
Before it just the whole house of cards becomes untenable.
There's one thing that's kind of again another wild card I want to throw in here. We've talked about it and kind of passed over it a little bit. The temple and the rebuilding of the temple. Isn't there something that's supposed to happen in Israel with the rebuilding of the temple on top of the dome before all this occurs?
No. Futurism believes that a temple has to be rebuilt in Jerusalem in order to fulfill the prophecies of Daniel. All right. And this is because in the futuristic interpretation, in which antichrists turn up and you have Armageddons and all this sort of deal, and a lot of it is centered around this idea that 1948 signified the return of Israel to its homeland, and this was all prophesied, and it'll culminate in a temple there. What I need people to understand is this: God made it very clear through his prophets that Jerusalem would no longer be his home. There would be a new Jerusalem. And this is often at the basis of what people think is a new temple. All right? The new temple, and the temple that Christ came to build, because when David thought about building a temple, he was told, King David, he was told by God, you got blood in your hands. It'll be a son of yours who will do this. And of course, everybody thought that when Solomon, his son and successor, built the great temple back then, this was fulfillment of that. But really, it was a messianic prophecy. It was fine to have the temple there, and God inhabited that temple because the Ark of the Covenant had been removed from Shiloh, the first resting place when Israel had entered into Israel. It had been removed from Shiloh, basically because the high priest went crazy and started taking sexual favors for sacrifices and all this sort of stuff, and then stuck the ark in front of Israel when they fought the Philistines and thought that that would ensure they'd win the battle. So God gave up on Shiloh and said, that's the end of Shiloh. And David said, I'll build a temple, and to do so, I'll conquer Jerusalem, where Melchizedek had originally been ensconced back in the time of Abraham. And when he conquered it, he said, right, I've conquered Jerusalem, city of peace. I'm going to build this temple. And God said, not for you to do. It's for one of your sons. They thought it was Solomon, but really the temple building was actually David's son, who would be Jesus Christ, Christ being a son of David through lineage. Okay? And when Christ said, I will pull this down and build it up in 3 days, it had always been the plan of God, that the true temple of God is the people of his kingdom. So the kingdom of God is constituted by people, the Israelites in the Old Testament, who were a nation of priests, a special possession unto God, and so on. And it is their faith, their corporate faith, that ultimately makes the temple that God works in. And this is why Christ refers to the living temple. Some of you will be pillars, some of you will be cornerstones. He refers to himself as the cornerstone of that temple. Okay? So the New Jerusalem and the new temple is really the acceptance by the congregated, called out people who accept Christ as their Messiah. It is wherever two or more are gathered that constitute this kingdom. And where they practice his commandments and his laws, and so subsequently it becomes a living kingdom that is not subject to a geographical area. Now, yeah.
So the evangelicals and the Jews in Israel, or the Israelis, are looking for something to happen, and it almost seems like we talked earlier about some of the distractions or red herrings. Is this one of the things that people are looking for, while in the other hand the magic is really going on? There is the prophecies being fulfilled.
Okay, the Israeli question, always very difficult because of a lot of issues, and in evangelical thinking, of course, it's the old story of whoever curses my people will be cursed, whoever blesses them will be blessed, and this has been placed on the Jewish people who have basically founded Israel, or Jewish people in general. If you ask any Jew worth his salt, as such, in terms of their own Judaism and so on, they will tell you that the only time that Israel could return to the Promised Land, and in my opinion, the Promised Land, crossing the Jordan, is that land that, it is the earth under the kingdom of God. It's not a geographical entity in the Middle East. It's expanded so much further. But any Jew will tell you that returning to Jerusalem from diaspora can only be achieved with the Messiah. Well, Judaism rejected Jesus Christ as the Messiah. That's fine. I haven't got a problem with that. That's their choice as such, all right?
Yes.
What I have a problem with is this. Zionist Judaism, which an increasing amount of Jews do not recognize, has supplanted the Messiah with the idea that the Jewish people are in fact their own Messiah. In other words, they've got to take matters into their own hands. All right, and it's been long enough. We want to get back, have our own country. We can't suffer another Holocaust. Therefore, we will go there and do it ourselves. All right. And you see, this is one of the reasons a lot of people tend to forget with regards the split in Judaism between Zionist Jews and Judaism as a whole. Number one, it's a minority of Jews that have returned to Israel. And the vast majority of them still live in the United States, Europe, and other places in the world. And increasingly, many of them are starting to see the Israeli state as a potentially detrimental, effect on their own safety. Now, a problem amounts to this. For evangelical Christians, the reason they need to understand it, the reason that the Zionist regime has called themselves Israelis. Have you ever wondered why they didn't call themselves Israelites?
Yeah, no, I never even crossed my mind.
It is simply because Israeli is the masculine. All right? Israelite is feminine. And Israelites were the nation of people who were to be the Messiah's bride. In calling themselves Israelis, they are basically stating to the world they are the groom, the Messiah themselves. Do you understand what I'm saying there?
Yeah, it's pretty profound.
Yeah. Okay. So that's what Zionism is. All right. It's basically an impatience. We reject Christ as Messiah. It's time that we got back to the land called Israel, and we're going to do it ourselves. Now, there is a distinct problem in Christians who then support this as prophetic fulfillment in relationship to going into the promised land, and so subsequently they're going to build a temple there and fulfill all the prophecies as they relate in Revelation.
And cause a bunch of a billion Arab people to really be upset.
Oh yeah,
upset about that plan, right?
Yeah.
They've got the current temple on the rock at this point, from what
Yes,
I
exactly. The problem here is this: Christians need to understand that, number one, God forsake the geographical location Jerusalem. All right, and as I pointed out before, this is one of the reasons why God in human form, as Christians accept Jesus Christ, when he ascended, he did so at the required distance that shows yourself going into exile from the tabernacle.
200 meters or something,
Yeah,
right?
the Mount of Olives, right?
Mm-hmm.
Now the whole, he's right there in Jerusalem for everybody to see, but he does it at exactly the distance required by the law when going there. What I'm saying is that at that point in time, Jerusalem ceased to be the center of God's concern. I say it stopped being his postbox. All right, it stopped being his address for where it is. The other factor involved is this, and a lot of people are going to find this very difficult to deal with, but there is a struggle in the Bible between Jacob and Esau, which is very famous throughout the Bible. And the way that Jacob and Esau came to problems was not so much that Esau was not a nice bloke. He really wasn't the kind of guy that obviously God had in mind to think like God. He basically set about making himself a king by his own hand, and he was a hunter, a very outgoing bloke, who at the end of the day did not care about his birthright. Okay, now what happened was he sold his birthright to Jacob. And so subsequently, Jacob inherited the birthright. The birthright is the name Israel, which means, the nation of people who would live. So Jacob's name actually gets changed to Israel.
Mm-hmm.
Okay? So it is through Jacob, not Esau, that you get the birthright name. The problem is that when Jacob then pulls the stunt with his mother of putting a whole lot of goat skins over him so he looks like Esau, he goes in, and the blind Isaac is fooled into giving Jacob the blessing as well. Okay? Now, this was wrong. This was a crime. Even though it worked to God's plan that the right brother got both the birthright name and also the blessing, Jacob had been wronged. Esau had been wronged. Okay? And the prophecy is that one day he would break his brother's yoke off him and he would rule himself. Now, when you look at the prophecy to do with Esau Edom down through the line, a clear prophecy of theirs is that at some point they will take and hold the high places of worship again. What I'm postulating to people, without going into too much detail, is that on losing the blessing, Esau's descendants through the Amalekites, right down to, remember a guy called Herod, who was an Idumean?
Yes.
A descendant of Esau. Esau's descendants have striven to once again inherit the blessing and also the true name, all right, that was bestowed on Jacob. And as a result of that, what you would call deception and crime that was committed by Jacob, there was going to come a point in time when Jacob or Israel would itself be deceived by somebody bearing acting as somebody different. Okay? Here's what I'm saying, which is very controversial. Esau Edom murdered its way into the temple in Jerusalem. Talmudic Judaism came under the auspices of Edomites at the time, so that when Nicodemus and Joseph Arimathea were part of the Sanhedrin, there were also these Edomites who supposedly by the law of God should not have been involved there. All right, so it's basically a family squabble that's going down.
Yes.
So Esau Edom is actually involved in there, all right, at that time, murdering its way. When they disperse in 70 AD, Talmudic Judaism is a religion on the lam. It doesn't have a home place. It has no temple or whatever. we know from history, and a lot of people hate this, but it is an actual fact, that the Khazar Empire by the 700s converted to Judaism, and that the vast majority of Jews, Ashkenazi Jews, have their origins with the Khazar people rather than from the Middle East, as the Sephardic Jews actually do. All right? Okay, not a problem at this point in time. They have their religion and they go about it. The problem is that Zionist Judaism, this Judaism that seeks to convert the Jewish people into their own Messiah, all right, I believe is actually the manifestation of Esau Edom's continued desire to get one back over true Israel, Jacob.
Jacob, yeah.
All right. And that the trap that they've fallen into, all right, there will come a time when they will masquerade as Israel, all right, and they will take the old high places that have been forsaken by God. Now, in my opinion, Zionist Judaism fits this, which is basically an Edomite prophecy, fits this to a T. It has taken the high places. It has manifested itself under the name of Israel, a name that was given to the descendants of Jacob. They claim to be Jacob, but they are not. Hence the saying, those who say they are Jews are not Jews. All right? Now, the controversial aspect about this, I have to say, for people who would sort of say, oh, this smacks of anti-Semitism and all that sort of stuff, ask any Jew worth his salt, and they will tell you there has always been a problem with naming the state of Israel, Israel in the first place. Most of them said, no, the best we can do is call it Judah. All right? And, you know, the fact that they went in anyway, called it Israel, turned themselves into a secular state, adopted the name of Israelis, giving themselves a masculine definition, which puts them at odds with the coming Messiah, even of Judaism, let alone the Christian Messiah being Christ.
Right.
In doing that, marks them, in my opinion, as Edomites seeking to get back that which they sold for a mess of pottage.
Wow. Yeah, that's I watched a video. Somebody sent me a video and said, you're not going to see it. Maybe it was on Facebook. I got it off Facebook, but they said you're not going to see this in the mainstream media. And it was a bunch of the Sephardic, I think I'm saying that, Jews,
Mm-hmm.
recently, just within the last few days, going to Iran to award the
Ahmadinejad.
Ahmadinejad and he was moved into tears, and they were in tears, and it was like they were thanking him for protecting the 50,000 Jews that are living in Tehran and taking good care of them, and thanking him. And I'm like, what? How does this? It's really confusing because as a Christian and going down into Texas and with the evangelicals and things like that, it was always like that. Exactly what you said. Don't curse the Jews, protect them, because that's our job. And then as I start to go into history and I go into study and hear things like what you're saying, and then see this picture of like, what? Why are these old Jewish guys sitting with Ahmadinejad in Iran, thanking him? And well, who are the ones that are mad at him? So something is, and then I see this another picture of like 50,000 rabbis in the black, protesting against the Israeli, saying something about the Zionist government there. So something is amiss that I don't quite understand yet. But that they're making the sense between Esau and Jacob, where he stole the like I said, the two different things, the blessing and the title, right? The title and the blessing, and them. But at the point, Esau didn't really care, did he? I mean, was he upset at that, or he didn't really with the pottage when he traded for the pottage? It was like he could care less.
No, he didn't really. He couldn't care less because at that time he had murdered Nimrod, and grabbed his. If you go into the book of Jasher, he'd murdered Nimrod and grabbed his royal robes, which some say were fashioned after the fig leaves that Adam wore in the Garden of Eden. But nonetheless, he grabbed his royal robes, and as far as he was concerned, he didn't need this, this funny birthright from this god. He had Nimrod's gear, and that was what was going to give him the power. That's why he was, according to the book of Jasher, he was starving because he'd been on the run from Nimrod's kinsman, trying to kill him in revenge. And that's, this is the type of man that Esau was, as opposed to Jacob, who really valued the relationship with God that the birthright and blessing would bring. But Esau was the oldest, so it was going to go to him. But Esau showed the type of guy he was. And to be perfectly honest, the Zionist state has shown the type of people they are, because, any Christian needs to ask this question, all right, that even if they were the people of the book, and even if they were blinded on the basis that they didn't accept Jesus Christ, but they're God's chosen people, when they were brought back to Israel, they were brought back in 1948. But if they were dedicated to being this culture and so on, then something profound should have happened in 1997. And given what we've spoken about all through this, the Israeli state should have declared a Jubilee. And it did not. It just continued with the secular crap, of just yet another kingdom state, that engages in all this. They are not bringing forth the fruits, of the kingdom. When Christ talked about the fig leaf, the fig tree, flowering, he didn't say it would bear fruit. This, I believe, was a direct prophecy of what we see in the state of Israel. The figs, remember, there were good figs and there were bad figs. Yeah. And the fig tree was always the representative of Judah, whereas the olive tree was representative of Israel. But it was a fig tree that was cursed by Christ. And he said, when you see it bringing forth the leaves, the time is near. But it being of the bad figs, it would never bring forth good. It would never bring forth fruit.
Fruit, right?
And I've been on this theme all the way through our discussion, Mark, where if you can't bring forth the fruits, you'll be judged and you'll go the other way. So any Christian who wants to bless a Jew based on the don't curse them or else you'll be cursed sort of scenario, really should be telling every Jew that he knows, don't go near Israel, don't have anything to do with it, get out of there. Instead, what Zionist evangelicals are doing is that they're paying money, they're collecting money to ship Jewish families into this hellhole that is going to, bust aside. And if God's prophecies are actually anything to go by, it's going to be destroyed. It's just going to become a stubble after the flame that sweeps through it. Old Jerusalem, it's gone. You can't go back to Old Jerusalem. That's old thinking. That's not New Jerusalem thinking. New Jerusalem is wherever the living body of Christ and his, and those that make up that body are. And this is how I'd go about blessing. I saw in a similar thing, because I'd correct you that the Ahmadinejad meeting actually took place in New York when he was over there recently for a statement.
Oh, was it? Oh, yeah. That's right. Forgive me. Forgive me. You're right.
And to me, I'd point at those guys and say, they're your real Jews. There are the guys that if you want to get to know Judaism, go and talk to that lot and so on. You won't find a Benjamin Netanyahu amongst any of them. But they, in my opinion, they do actually represent a growing majority of Jews who, to use a Christian term, have seen the light.
Yes.
Of what is really going on. And I saw a Zionist Jew to a certain extent. Jews since the time of Saul, people of the Judaism faith, I'm talking about Saul who became the Apostle Paul.
Yes.
They've hated Christianity and they sought to persecute it. And of course they hate Christ. Such people of Judaism actually conform to the definition of what an antichrist is. It's somebody who denies Christ was the Messiah.
Yes.
All right. And Saul was one of them at the very beginning, and you've had plenty of them previously. So when I saw this Zionist Jew asked a question about, What do you think about support of particularly American evangelicals for the Jewish state? He couldn't help himself. He came out with it. He said, they're not our friends. They're not helping us. They only want to do all this because they've got some crazy notion, about if they get us over there, then Armageddon's on the way, and that's when Christ comes back. And I think this is the problem. A lot of evangelical Christians are playing the game that Judas played in trying to provoke Christ into manifesting his powers and getting rid of the Romans. A lot of evangelical Christians are saying, hey, somehow we've got to engineer Armageddon. We've got to back the Zionist state, and we've got to create a situation where the Russians are going to come down, and when that happens, then Christ's got no alternative but to return.
Wow.
Scary.
Yeah, it's scary. A lot to think about coming from so many different directions, and it's you wonder what to think anymore. Or how to think, and who not to offend but also being able to look at things objectively. You may have to offend some people, and
I'm going to throw one more thing in terms of the Islamic State, which needs with Christians needs to be understood, and that is that when I said that the history of Christianity very much follows the history of the three first kings of Israel: Saul going into David, going into Solomon. All right. When you look at the changeover, the rule of David, okay, in terms of that, you can see a parallel with what's going on in the rebellion of Absalom, his son. And Abinaphothol, I think, was the advisor to David. Now, what you have is Christ, the son of David, who is betrayed by one of his followers, a man who had a position of authority within the disciples. He looked after the treasury and so on, and so had some influence and so on. That was, of course, Judas Iscariot. Okay, and Judas Iscariot hung himself as a result of his betrayal, out of grief at what he'd done. But he betrayed the Christ to the high priests, who believed that they represented, the teachings to do with who the Messiah would be, and not Christ. Okay, so you've got that dynamic happening there. In the time of King David had an advisor, Abinaphothol, who got fed up with David. David just simply wasn't getting on with the business how he felt it should be done. Pretty similar to how Judas felt that Christ simply wasn't getting on with kicking out the Romans.
Yes.
Okay, so he looks at this guy called Absalom, and Absalom has this attitude, all right, which is very, very crucial to understanding this. He's basically saying, he's standing out the gates, if I were king, I would do things differently. I'd do it like this, all right? Basically not like my dad. He's hopeless. If I were king, I would do this. And Abinaphothol starts to think, we've got something here. And he backs Absalom in the famous revolt against David. All right. And Absalom ultimately ends up, proclaiming himself king. He goes and he rapes David's concubines. He does the whole works. It's, it really is, tragic stuff. And finally, he's killed in battle when David returns to the fold. If you take these two models, Christ, remembering being the essence of prophecy, his relationship with Judas and betrayal to the high priests. If you take David, his betrayal by Abinaphothol to Absalom, where Absalom is conferred with the title of king, what you find is that you've got a very curious correlation with the church, the Christian church, taking and conferring the birthright name on a group of people who are very much anti the person who is the only person who qualifies for that name, Jesus Christ. All right. In other words, Christ on his return, all right, is King of Kings, but certainly his kingdom is Israel, man ruled under God. Okay. The birthright goes through Jacob, down through the histories, into David, into Christ, being the Messiah. and the nation the kingdom that he establishes holds that birthright. By giving the name and bestowing the name Israel on the Zionists who are anti the Christ, as an anti Jesus Christ, they have effectively betrayed Christ. They've given the birthright to the wrong guys.
Wow.
You see where I'm going with that one? Okay.
So in a sense, the evangelicals are being like, who was the father, Jacob?
They've been like Judas.
Wow.
Yeah, they're bestowing the. You see, only Christ has the right to establish Israel. All right, and the thing is, okay, Christ means the anointed. Okay, so
Yeah.
ask any person of Judaism, not Zionist Judaism, but Judaism. All right, who has the right to establish the kingdom of Israel? They'll tell you it's the Messiah. All right. You and I, as Christians, recognize Jesus Christ as that Messiah. They don't. That's the difference between us and Judaism. But Zionist Judaism is a very virulent form of sort of this Esau Amalekite need to appropriate, to win back the birthright that they sold and establish themselves as the Messiah.
Yeah. It's what a deception. I mean, who was the father of Jacob and Esau?
Isaac. And remember,
Isaac.
it's a deception. But you see, this is how God works in His plan and so on, because it was a deception that set Esau off on this almost pathological need to get back what he felt he'd been cheated of. All right,
And we're participating in that perception in a sense in
we are, but
America.
it's actually their right under the law. All right, the Zionists and the Zionist Jews, the Zionist evangelicals, they can give it a go. All right, and if by some miracle they actually did bring forth the fruits of the kingdom and became a blessing to all nations on the earth, then I stand corrected. All right, in terms of all this. But that's what they have to do. They will have a set period of time, like Babylon has had, to prove themselves. And if they fail, it's all over. As I say, I would tell every individual Jew I could who's an Israeli citizen, I would say, get out of there. It ain't going to work long term. And there's plenty of evidence to show that some of the big boys in the Anglo banking establishment, including Rothschilds and all that kind of stuff, these guys have a Luciferian ethos where Zionist Judaism has been used by these people. You've probably heard of the letters of Albert Pike.
Oh yes.
Okay, and Albert Pike, you got three
morals
world
and dogma, right?
Yeah. You got three world wars is what he's saying that they'd set up, okay? And people say the letter is a forgery and all that, but it's incredibly prescient in terms that it was written in the 1800s.
Tracking pretty good.
Yes, I mean we're two world wars and counting.
The forger, either way, the forger or Albert Pike was pretty good at prophecy.
Yeah, it's exactly it's coming out pretty much as he stated, and for me the biggest issue there is that the last part of it is a world war to destroy the faiths of Islam, Judaism, and Christianity. All right. And what better way than to set the Zionist Jews up for a fall that destroys the faith of the evangelical Christians who thought that this was all, going to trigger a return of Christ, and destroys the Dome on the Mount that the Islam has been told will never fall. You know what I mean?
Oh yeah. Wow.
I mean, there you've got, for people of that persuasion of faith, particularly evangelical Christians, if that happens, all right, if the state of Israel ceases to exist in a nuclear holocaust, which everybody is sort of worried about or something like that, man, have they got a crisis of faith? But you know what? As far as I'm concerned, they should feel even more guilt for all those Jews that they sent there and the mistaken belief that they were fulfilling prophecy.
Yeah, I mean, when you take it to that next level, all of a sudden, all the confusion just clears up and it becomes simple again.
Mm.
You know, where you take it up to the level of the Luciferian doctrine, the satanic, the Saturn death cult,
Yes. Yeah.
to saying
Exactly.
the ultimate goal is to keep you confused on the world level, but just remember on a higher level of abstraction that the real thing is to destroy your faith,
Absolutely.
or keep your faith from getting other people encouraged by your faith.
Yeah. I mean, I have no problems living with Muslims because many of their laws are very compatible with the ones that I would follow. There's certain things that I would disagree with in how they go about it. I think they're completely at odds. They don't they've taken spare the rod and spoil the child, and the stoning laws of children, all that kind of stuff to the nth degree. When in fact, spare the rod, spoil the child simply means give them a marker from which give them a measure. The rod meaning
Yes.
a measure by which they can know the difference between good and right.
There we are,
Good
back
and
to
bad.
measure. We're back to
Measures.
measures again.
Yeah, we're not talking about beating some kid with a rod. We're talking about instilling in them the line between right and wrong.
Yeah.
And this is where I think Islam is in a very immature stage of its development, and so on. Yet Muslims that I've spoken to, who, with regards to this, themselves are somewhat aghast at the way that in the way that I'm aghast at fundamental Christianity of the evangelical kind. They themselves are aghast at these fundamental Muslims, going about the thing. My one beef with with Judaism is, of course, a theological thing. I accept that Christ was the Messiah. They don't, but this is something that I don't need to get in a fist fight over with them.
Yes.
It's and really, honestly, the Jewish guys that you saw meeting with Ahmadinejad wouldn't dream of getting in a fist fight with me the other way.
No.
It's the evidence is all there where people can go about their own thinking and so on in this world, and we can choose the paths that we go down and what we believe to be truth and what we believe to be right and so on. But there are just basic laws there that are really applicable, and and I include this with any atheist. I haven't got a problem with atheists. As far as I'm concerned, everybody's saved, and then when it becomes if and when, depending on your viewpoint, it becomes fact that we're all resurrected, then for an atheist, it just becomes fact.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? It just becomes that's what it is. But I have no problem. I don't have a belief that he's off to eternal torment because he's an atheist.
Right.
It's just simply a process that he has to go through, or she has to go through, on this basis. And I think that's that's my own sort of Christian approach to these things. But boy, I run a risk when I start talking about the Zionist thing. I have very much avoided that and sat in death cult. Because it's such a hair trigger.
It is for so many people, and just the thought about it or beginning to talk, you can just see people switch off or get afraid, and whatever it is. I would like to live in a country where it's open game to talk about anything.
Okay, this is Mark, and I'm talking to you after the fact during the editing process as I listen to this. As you can see, we've just gone through some sensitive and speculative things. And so some may take offense to it, and I sure hope that if you do, you will write me and tell me if you've got counter data to that. I look at things as one of the things I've learned in therapy is a lot of times people like to hide stuff and not tell it, and that can be the key or the keystone to the work with people to get the change in their system. So I've learned to be able to search for and accept and be okay with all the data. Going back myself in my past in my life is to say, give me the data. I'd rather have the data. Going back and searching the history of some of the things that have happened to me in my life with different people. It's like, tell me why. Give me your sense of why. So personally, again, I didn't find it offensive. I look at the data and say, okay, here's everything that I can get, and then make my own judgment. Hopefully you do the same. I'd love to hear comments and some more about that. It was near the end. Troy and I went off on a couple tangents, and we were saying goodbye, and he started talking a little bit about Paul being into mixed martial arts. And I laughed at him, but then he went on to explain a little bit. So I put that little piece back in here right after my conversation here. I'll put that in where we enter in with Paul coming in about mixed martial arts and how he knew fighting very well and how he was actually one of those people that practiced mixed martial arts and had trained in it for many years. And then we basically say goodbye. So that's it. And I just wanted to come in and make a little break and make that statement about hopefully that nobody found offense and that they got the data. And I'd love to hear some more information. I will be researching this a little bit more and talking to Troy about it again. So anyways, here's Paul the mixed martial artist.
Oh, that's great. It's little things like that. Knowing Paul was a mixed martial arts fan, for instance, and things
Mixed
like
martial
that.
arts.
Oh yeah, pancration, as they used to call it in his day.
Really?
Yeah. Let's see, the whole. I worked in the fight business as a video cameraman when I was in Hong Kong. I got to know the whole thing, and of course, there's that, link about the good fight. You train like a fighter and the runner. It's a lonely road, to getting it. They fight for a glory that lasts but a time. We train for an everlasting glory, and so on. But when you read between the lines, anybody who's done martial arts training to any degree knows that Paul knows what he's talking about what a fighter goes through. Sure, they get out there in the ring for that brief moment and the crowd goes wild, but nobody knows the months of solitude and just being on your own and the agonies and so on. And Paul equated this with it. And it has a lot to do with Paul's travels through roads, these places and so on like that, which were hotbeds. People think of gladiatorial fighting in Rome as being the most popular. It was actually mixed martial arts, this sort of wrestling, boxing, fighting, all that kind of stuff. That was the game. I think it was only second to chariot racing at the time. And Paul, to use it as an analogy, all I'm saying is that to use it as an analogy for how a Christian should approach his study of the Word and such. Paul had to know what a fighter went through. It's not the analysis of an armchair fan that watch Friday night fights. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
He's been there in the gym and he's seen these guys what they're about. And for me the most important thing that came from that, Mark, was when you train in fighting, you're on your own a lot, but when you do have fellowship in the fight game, it's usually one-on-one. You don't attend big rallies or something like that. You have you and your trainer, you and your sparring partner. It's one-on-one, and this is what we're engaging in.
Yeah. I like it. That's hopefully we're breaking some ground somewhere.
All right. So how do you want to wrap this up then?
Well, I think that I'll include this last little bit about the MMA and just include this even and say this has been incredible. Again, we thought it'd be a couple hours, and here we are at over 6 hours again.
Yeah, it's amazing.
And thank you so much for your time and your energy and your heart that you put into this. And
no, right back at you. It's like I say, the work begins for you in many respects, and I appreciate that.
Yeah. Well, thank you, and we'll see what happens with the audience with this, and whatever I get from people, I'll send your way so you get an idea of how they're feeling and responding. And
Sure.
Let's see what questions come up next, and look for round 3.
Yeah, sounds good. Yeah.
All right, Troy. God bless you. Thank you so much for everything, and it's again my pleasure, and thanks for the time.
Hey, it's all mine, Mark, and look forward to maybe another session in the near future.
Okay, my friend. You take care.
Take care. Bye.
Thanks. Bye-bye.